"I'll give you $500,000 if you fix this machine," said the mine owner. Until Frank Miller was wiping his greasy hands on his already worn overalls when he heard the sound of a luxury car stopping in front of his small shop. At 66, he had fixed practically everything with a motor in the town of Leadville, but he never imagined someone would offer him $500,000 for a single job. The young man in a dark suit got out of the car and walked straight to him. He was about 30, with well-groomed hair and an expression that mixed desperation with determination. "Are you Frank Miller, the mechanic?" he asked, extending his hand. "I am. And you are?" "Ryan Thompson. I need your help. I have a machine that's been down for 3 months and no specialist has been able to get it running. They told me you work miracles with engines." Frank let out a dry laugh. "Miracles? I don't know about. But I know a thing or two. What kind of machine?" "A mining excavator, big. Really big." The mechanic stopped cleaning his hands and looked at the young man more carefully. "Mining excavator? Son, that's not really my area. I work on trucks, cars, tractors." "I'll give you $500,000 if you can get it working," said Ryan, cutting him off. Frank nearly dropped the rag he was holding. $500,000? Are you serious?" "Completely serious. The machine cost $10 million. If it's not running by the end of the week, I lose everything." The retired mechanic looked at the young man for a few seconds. There was something in his eyes that bothered him. A strange familiarity he couldn't place. "Why me? There must be dozens of specialists out there." "I've tried them all. Specialized mechanics, engineers, technicians from the manufacturer itself. No one could do it. My grandfather always said that when a machine won't work for anyone, only a true master can make it obey." "Your grandfather?" Ryan hesitated for a moment. He was a wise man. He understood machines. Frank felt a tightness in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd thought about wise people who understood machines, people who were no longer here. "Where is this excavator?" "At my company, Thompson Mining. It's about 40 kilometers from here." "Thompson Mining," Frank repeated thoughtfully. "That name sounds familiar." "It's possible. The company has been around for 20 years. Betty appeared in the shop doorway, drying her hands on her apron. She was a 63-year-old woman, grey hair tied in a simple bun, but with eyes still bright and full of life. "Frank, lunch is ready," she said, but stopped when she saw the stranger. "Betty, this is Ryan. He's offering me a job." "What kind of job?" she asked, with the natural suspicion of someone who'd spent her whole life looking after her husband. "Fixing a machine for $500,000. Betty raised her eyebrows. $500,000? What kind of machine is that?" "A mining excavator," Ryan replied. "I know it seems like a lot of money, but that's exactly what it's worth to me to have it running. And if my husband can't fix it, then I pay nothing, zero risk for you." Frank looked at his wife. He knew that expression. It was the same one she always had when an opportunity came up. Caution mixed with hope. "Can I at least see the machine before deciding?" he asked. "Of course. We can go right now if you want." "Frank," Betty called him aside. "Are you sure? $500,000 sounds too good to be true." "I know, dear, but it doesn't hurt to take a look. If it's a scam, we just come home, that's it." "Do you promise you won't get involved in anything dangerous?" "I promise. It's just an engine, Betty. The worst that can happen is I can't fix it." She sighed. "All right. But I'm coming with you." "You don't need to. I'm coming with you," she repeated. In that tone Frank knew well and knew was useless to argue with. Ryan smiled. "Of course, Mrs. Betty. It'll be a pleasure to have both of you there. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out since we're just starting. Now, continuing. The road to the mining company was full of curves winding through the mountains of Colorado. Frank was watching the landscape through Ryan's car window, but his mind was restless. There was something about that young man that bothered him, a sense of déjà vu he couldn't explain. "How long have you had this company?" he asked. "I inherited it from my father 2 years ago. He died in a car accident." "I'm sorry." "Thank you. It wasn't easy taking over everything so young. The company was financially complicated." Betty leaned forward from the back seat. "And this machine that needs fixing, is that important?" It's the centerpiece of $1 million contract. If it doesn't work by Friday, I lose the contract and the company goes bankrupt." "Friday?" Frank looked at him. "Today is Tuesday. That gives me 3 days? 3.5 to be exact. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because if I had, would you have agreed to come?" Frank thought for a moment. "Probably not." "Exactly." When they arrived at the mining company, Frank was impressed by the size of the operation. There were several administrative buildings, a huge yard with machines and trucks, and an open-pit mine that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Wow," Betty murmured. "It's bigger than I imagined." Ryan took them to a massive shed at the back of the complex. When he opened the doors, Frank felt his heart race. There it was, a giant yellow excavator, much larger than any machine he had ever seen. "My God," he whispered. "Impressive, isn't it?" said Ryan. "It weighs 40 tons. The engine has 1,200 horsepower." Frank slowly approached the machine. There was something about it that made him feel small, but at the same time, a part of him that had been dormant for years began to awaken. It was the same feeling he had when he was young and saw a complex machine for the first time, a mix of fear and fascination. "What exactly is the problem?" he asked, walking around the excavator. "It starts, but it doesn't respond to commands. It's as if its brain is confused." "Hydraulic system?" The technicians checked everything. Hydraulic, electrical, electronic. It's all perfect, but it just doesn't work. Frank climbed onto the machine and sat in the operator's seat. The dashboard was full of lights and buttons he didn't recognize, but the basic principle was the same as any machine. There was an engine, there were controls, and something was preventing them from communicating properly. "Do you have the technical manuals? All of them in 3 languages. And have you tried resetting the electronic system?" "Several times." Frank got down from the machine and opened the engine hood. What he saw inside impressed him even more. It was a work of engineering, but at its core, just a very large and complex engine. "Ryan, can I ask some questions that might seem strange?" "Sure. Where exactly did you get this machine?" The young man hesitated. "I bought it from a company that was closing down." "Which company? Why does that matter?" "Because sometimes a machine carries the history of the places it's worked. If it was mistreated, abandoned, or if there was an accident, that can affect how it works." Ryan looked around as if uncomfortable. "It was from a company called Miller and Brothers Mining." Frank felt as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over him. Betty immediately noticed the change in his expression. "Frank? What is it?" "Miller and Brothers," he repeated, his voice almost disappearing. "You know them?" asked Ryan. "Knew them," Frank replied, leaning against the machine. "My brother was a partner in this company." "Your brother?" "Jack Miller. He passed away 3 years ago." Ryan turned pale. "Jack Miller was your brother?" "He was. Why, did you know him?" The young man ran his hand through his hair, clearly upset. I need to tell you something." "Ryan, what's going on?" asked Betty. "Jack Miller was my uncle." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Frank looked at the young man with wide eyes, beginning to understand why he had found his face familiar. "Your uncle? What do you mean, your uncle?" "He was my father's brother. My father was George Thompson." "George?" Frank sat down heavily on a toolbox. "George was my brother-in-law. He married my sister Nancy." "That's right. Nancy was my mother." Betty approached her husband and put a hand on his shoulder. "Frank, are you okay?" "So you are. You are my nephew." "I am. Why didn't you tell me this before?" Ryan took a deep breath. "Because I knew you wouldn't come if you knew. Why wouldn't I come? Because you and my Uncle Jack had a fight and never spoke again, and because my father always said you blamed them for the bankruptcy of your first company." Frank stood up abruptly. "That's true, I did blame them. And you want me to fix the machine that belonged to my brother? The machine he bought with the money that should have been used to save our partnership?" "Uncle Frank, don't call me uncle," he exploded. "You lied to me. You brought me here under false pretenses. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the whole truth." "It's the same thing." Betty stepped between the two. "Stop this. Ryan, Why do you really want my husband to fix this machine? Because I need it running to honor the contracts. If I can't, 300 families will be left unemployed. And why specifically my husband? Ryan looked at Frank with pleading eyes. Because Uncle Jack always said that Frank was the best mechanic he knew. He said if a machine wouldn't work for him, it was because it was beyond repair. He said that? Many times. He said that the two of you together were unbeatable. That the fight between you was the worst thing that ever happened to him. Frank felt a lump in his throat. It had been years since he'd heard his brother's name without feeling anger, but now there was something different, a mix of hurt and longing that he preferred not to acknowledge. Even so, I can't do it. Please, insisted Ryan. It's not just about the money. It's about the people who depend on this company, about families that will go hungry if I go bankrupt. Those people should have thought of that before working for a company built on lies. What lies, Uncle? Don't call me Uncle, repeated Frank. The lies your Uncle Jack told to get the contracts that should have been ours. The lies he used to push me out of the partnership. Are you sure they were lies? I am. Ryan took an envelope from his inner jacket pocket. Then maybe you should read this before you leave. What is it? A letter that Uncle Jack left for you. It was in the machine. In the machine? Inside a sealed compartment, with instructions to be given to you if anyone tried to fix it. Frank looked at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. I don't want to read it. Frank, said Betty softly, maybe you should. No. Whatever Jack wrote, it won't change what happened. But it might explain why it happened, suggested Ryan. I don't want explanations. I want to leave. Betty held her husband's arm. Honey, we came all this way. What harm can it do to read a letter? It can do a lot of harm, Betty. It can hurt. Sometimes pain is necessary to heal. Frank looked at his wife, then at the nephew he'd never known, and finally at the letter. With trembling hands, he took the envelope and opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably Jack's. A bit messy, rushed, but familiar like my brother's own voice. Frank, if you're reading this, it means you need my help, even though I'm no longer here. It's strange to think about, but somehow it's comforting to know we can still work together, even if it's like this. First, I need to ask for your forgiveness for everything that happened between us. I know you think I betrayed you, that I stole the contracts that were ours, that I broke up our partnership out of greed. But that's not what happened. Do you remember the St. Joseph Quarry contract, the one that bankrupted our company? It wasn't because I made a deal behind your back. It was because I found out the quarry owner was using slave labor, and I refused to do business with him. When you insisted we should take the contract anyway because we needed the money, I knew we had a difference in values that couldn't be overcome. I couldn't tell you at the time because I knew you were desperate. Your Betty was sick, you had hospital debts, and I knew if I told you the truth, you'd hate me even more. I'd rather you hated me thinking I was greedy than thinking I was stopping you from saving your wife. I used my own money to pay for her treatment at the private hospital. That's why our business went under. Not because I stole the money, but because I used it to save Betty. And I never regretted it. After you left, I rebuilt the company alone, but it was never the same. You were always the brains of the operation. I was just the guy who talked well with clients. I bought this specific machine because I knew one day it would break down, and when that happened, only you could fix it. It's my way of apologizing and trying to bring our family back together. Your brother, who always loved you, Jack. Frank read the letter 3 times before he could fully process it. When he finished, his hands were shaking so much that Betty had to hold them. He paid for your treatment? She asked. It seems so, Frank replied, his voice choked. Did you know? No. I thought the insurance had covered everything. Ryan approached cautiously. My dad told me a bit about this. He said Uncle Jack sold his car and even mortgaged his house to get the money for Aunt Betty's treatment. Why did he never tell me? Because he knew you well enough to know you wouldn't accept the help. Frank sat down on the warehouse floor, leaning his back against the giant excavator. The anger he had carried for years was being replaced by a mixture of gratitude and guilt that was almost unbearable. He saved your life, Betty. And you hated him for it for 20 years, she replied softly. I didn't know. I know, love. He didn't want you to know. Ryan crouched beside his uncle. "What are you going to do now?" Frank looked up at the giant machine above him. Suddenly it no longer seemed like a symbol of his brother's lies, but like a gift, one last chance to work together. "I'm going to fix this machine," he said, wiping his eyes. "Not for the money, for my brother." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next 2 days were the most intense Frank had experienced in years. He arrived at the warehouse before sunrise and only left when it was dark. Betty stayed with him most of the time, making sandwiches and coffee so he wouldn't stop working. The machine was truly impressive. The more he studied its systems, the more he admired the engineering behind it. It was clear that Jack had chosen the best equipment available without skimping on quality. "Found anything?" Ryan asked, entering the warehouse on Thursday morning. "A lot of things," replied Frank, who was upside down under the machine, "but nothing that explains why it doesn't respond to commands." The technicians said the same thing. Were the technicians specialized in this specific model? They were. They came straight from the factory. Frank came out from under the machine, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You said you bought it from a company that was closing down?" "That's right." "And was it already faulty when you bought it?" Ryan hesitated. "Actually, no." "What do you mean, no?" "It worked perfectly for the first 2 months. The problem started 3 months ago." "And what happened 3 months ago?" "I laid off some employees. I had to cut costs." "Did you fire the machine operator?" "Among others." Frank stood up and looked at his nephew with an expression that mixed curiosity and suspicion. "Ryan, do you think someone might have sabotaged this machine?" "Sabotaged? Do you think that's possible?" "It's very possible. A machine doesn't just stop working out of nowhere, especially a machine of this quality. Either there's a serious defect or someone did something to make it stop. But the technicians found no signs of sabotage. Did the technicians look in the right place?" Ryan sat in a nearby chair, running his hands through his hair. "To be honest, I don't know if they did. I just told them the machine had stopped working and asked them to fix it." "Who did you fire?" "Several employees. It was tough. I didn't want to, but the financial situation was critical. But specifically, who operated this machine?" "A guy named Jason. Jason Miller." Frank felt his blood run cold. "Jason Miller? What do you mean, Jason Miller?" "Why? Do you know him?" "Ryan, Jason Miller is my son." The silence that followed was even heavier than the previous revelation. Ryan turned pale as a sheet. "Your son?" "My son. Who I haven't seen in 5 years, who left home because he said I was a failure and would never amount to anything." "My God. He was working for you?" "He was. He was one of the best operators I had, but when I needed to cut costs..." "You fired my son." "I fired everyone who earned more. It was nothing personal." Betty, who had been listening to the conversation, approached the two. "Frank, do you think Jason would do this?" "I don't know, Betty. It's been so long since I've spoken to him. I don't know who he is anymore." "But where is he now?" Ryan checked his phone. "I can find out. I have his address in the employee files." 15 minutes later, the 3 of them were in the car going after Jason. The address led to a housing project on the outskirts of Leadville, very different from the middle-class neighborhood where Frank and Betty lived. "It's here," said Ryan, stopping in front of a small but well-kept house. Frank took a deep breath before knocking on the door. When it opened, he found himself face to face with a younger version of himself. Jason was 28, but had the same dark eyes and the same stubborn expression Frank recognized from the mirror. "Dad?" Jason's voice showed total shock. "Hi, Jason. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you." Jason looked at Ryan and frowned. "And you brought my ex-boss along?" "It's a long story. Can I come in?" Jason hesitated but eventually stepped aside. The house was simple but tidy. There were pictures of a young brunette on the shelves and some toys scattered around the living room. "Do you have kids?" asked Betty, noticing the toys. "A daughter, Emma. She's 3 years old." "We didn't know," said Frank. "You never asked." "Jason, Dad, why are you here?" After 5 years without a word, you show up at my door with the guy who fired me. What do you want?" Frank looked at his son and felt his heart tighten. There was so much hurt in those eyes, so much accumulated resentment. "Ryan hired me to fix a machine, the mining company's excavator. So? The machine isn't broken, Jason. Someone sabotaged it." Jason's face changed subtly, but he tried to hide it. "And you think it was me?" "You were its operator. You know that machine better than anyone." "There were several people operating that machine, Dad. Not just me. But you were fired. You had a motive." Jason stood up abruptly. "Motive? You think I'd sabotage a machine because I got fired?" "I don't know, Jason. It's been so long since I talked to you that I don't know how you think anymore." "And whose fault is that?" "Mine. I know it's mine." The answer caught Jason by surprise. He had prepared for a fight, not an admission of guilt. "You know." "I do. I was a terrible father, a terrible husband, a terrible brother. I spent my whole life blaming everyone else for my failures, except myself." "Dad." "Jason, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you do something to that machine?" The son looked at the floor for a long time. When he raised his eyes again, they were wet. "I did." Ryan stepped forward. "What exactly did you do?" "I disconnected some cables from the control system. Nothing that would cause permanent damage, just enough to keep it from responding to commands." "Why?" "Because I was angry. Because I worked 2 years at that company, always on time, never missed a day, always did my job right, and still got fired at the first sign of trouble." "Jason," said Frank, "Ryan is going bankrupt. If the machine isn't working by tomorrow, 300 people will lose their jobs." "I know. And you still did it?" "I did it out of anger, Dad. In the moment, I didn't think about the consequences." Ryan sat down heavily on the couch. "Where are the cables?" "I can show you. They're easy to reconnect." "Then let's go," said Frank. "Wait," said Jason. "There's something you need to know first." "What?" "The reason I went to work at that mining company." "What reason?" "Because I found out it used to belong to Uncle Jack. And I wanted to understand why you hated your own brother so much." Frank felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "And what did you find out?" "I found out that Uncle Jack was a good man, that he treated his employees well, paid fair wages, cared about the families who depended on the company. And I found out you were wrong about him." "How did you find that out?" "By talking to people who worked with him. Jack was loved by everyone. They said he always talked about you, that he missed you, that he wanted to reconcile." Frank felt the tears coming back. "I found that out today too." "What do you mean?" Frank told his son about the letter, about the money for Betty's treatment, about all the truth he had discovered. When he finished, Jason was crying too. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for sabotaging the machine. I'm sorry for leaving home like that. I'm sorry for—" "No, Jason, I'm the one who's sorry. For being such a difficult father that you preferred to learn about your family by talking to strangers." The two hugged for the first time in 5 years, and Betty couldn't hold back her tears. "Now you can fix the machine together," she said. "Together?" asked Jason. "Together," confirmed Frank. "If you want." "I want, Dad. I always wanted to work with you." Ryan watched them with a mix of relief and emotion. "Then let's go. We still have a few hours before dark." Back at the shed, Jason showed exactly what he had done. It really was just a few disconnected cables, but chosen strategically to cause maximum confusion without permanent damage. "Where did you learn that?" asked Frank, impressed by the sophistication of the sabotage. "From Uncle Jack. He taught me everything about this machine. He said that a good operator needs to understand every bolt, every wire, every system." "Did he teach you that?" "He did. He spent hours explaining to me how everything worked. He said you can never have too much knowledge." Frank smiled when he heard that. It was exactly the kind of thing Jack always said when they were young. "Let's reconnect these cables." Working together, father and son managed to restore all the connections in less than an hour. When Frank turned on the machine, it responded perfectly to all commands. "It worked!" shouted Ryan, excited. Of course it worked, said Jason. My dad is the best mechanic in Colorado. He was the second best, corrected Frank. Your Uncle Jack was the first. Maybe, but now the two of us are a team again. Ryan approached them. Frank, the money I promised. Keep it, said Frank. Use it to pay the employees' salaries, but... No buts, my brother wouldn't do any different. Then at least let me rehire Jason. On one condition, said Frank. What? That I can come here from time to help with the machine maintenance, without charging anything, just for the pleasure of working. Agreed, Jason smiled. Dad, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Who? Your granddaughter. Betty got emotional. We have a granddaughter? You do, and she's going to love meeting her grandparents. That night at Jason's house, Frank held Emma for the first time. The girl had the same dark eyes as the Miller family and a smile that melted any heart. She's beautiful, said Betty with tears in her eyes. She looks just like Jason when he was little, commented Frank. And just like you, said Jason. Stubborn and curious. Family traits, laughed Betty. Sarah, Jason's wife, had prepared a special dinner to meet her in-laws. She was a kind and intelligent young woman who worked as a teacher at a municipal school. Jason always talked about you, she said to Frank and Betty. Even when he was hurt, I knew he missed you. We missed him too, admitted Betty. A lot. Dad, said Jason during dinner, can I ask you a question? Of course. Why did you never try to look for Uncle Jack to reconcile? Frank thought for a moment. Pride. Stupid pride of a stubborn man who preferred to be right than to be happy. And now? Now I've learned that family is more important than being right, that forgiving is more important than being right, that love is stronger than pride. Even if it's too late to reconcile with Uncle Jack? It's not too late. He knew I would forgive him one day. That's why he left that letter. That's why he bought that machine. He was waiting for me. You think so? I'm sure. Ryan, who had been invited to dinner, raised his glass. A toast to Jack Miller, for bringing our family together again, even though he's no longer here. To Uncle Jack, said Jason. To my brother, said Frank. To the man who saved my life, said Betty. Everyone drank in silence, feeling Jack's presence there with them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. On Friday morning, the machine worked perfectly throughout the entire demonstration for the clients. Ryan managed to close the contract, securing the company's future and all the employees' jobs, but the real victory had been won the night before, during the family dinner. Dad, said Jason, as they were putting away the tools in the shed, can I ask you one more thing? Of course, son. Would you like to be my partner in a workshop? How so? I want to open a workshop specialized in heavy machinery. With everything I've learned here and everything you can teach me, I think we could do good work together. Frank smiled. And where would this workshop be? Right here. Ryan offered a warehouse at the mining company. We could handle the maintenance of all his machines and still serve other clients. Did you talk about this with Sarah? I did. She thought it was a great idea. She said it would be good for Emma to grow up seeing her grandfather and father working together. And are you sure you want to work with a stubborn old man like me? I am. In fact, it's always been my dream. Even after everything that happened. Especially after everything that happened. Now I know you're not perfect, but I also know you love me. And that's what matters. Frank hugged his son again. Then we're partners. We're partners. Ryan approached the two. Can I suggest the name of the workshop? Go ahead, said Jason. Miller & Son Mechanics, in honor of Uncle Jack and your new partnership. Miller & Son, repeated Frank. I like the sound of that. Me too, said Jason. 3 months later, Miller & Son already had a waiting list of clients. The combination of Frank's experience with Jason's modern energy and knowledge proved unbeatable. Betty had become the official administrator of the company, handling accounting and customer service. Sarah helped in her spare time, and Emma was the workshop's mascot, always playing among the tools while her grandfather and father worked. "Do you think Jack would approve of this?" Betty asked Frank one afternoon as they watched Jason training some new employees. "I'm sure he would. In fact, I'm sure he planned all this." "How so?" "Think about it. He bought exactly the machine that would need a very experienced mechanic to fix. He knew Jason worked for Ryan. He knew Ryan would come to me when he had problems. You think he orchestrated everything?" "I think my brother knew all of us well enough to know how things would unfold. He planted the seeds and waited for them to bloom. A wise man. A man who was always smarter than me. It took me 20 years to understand that. Better late than never." "That's true." Ryan appeared at the workshop, as he did at least 3 times a week. "How are things going?" "Very well," replied Frank. "Did the new machine arrive?" "It arrived yesterday, and it's already having problems." "What kind of problems?" "The same as always. It turns on, but doesn't respond to commands." Jason laughed. "Leave it to me. After 3 months fixing Ryan's machines, I know what the problem is before I even look." "What is it?" "Lack of affection. Machines can feel when they're not well treated." "Affection?" asked Ryan. "It's my father's theory. He says machines are like people. They respond better when treated with respect and care." "And does it work?" "It always works." Frank approached the group, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Ryan, how's the dating going with that engineer?" "Ashley? It's going well. Actually, very well. Are you going to marry?" "I'm thinking of proposing to her." "Then do it soon. Life is too short to keep thinking." "You think so?" "I'm sure. If I had learned that earlier, I would have saved many years of loneliness and bitterness." "You're right. I'll propose to her at the end of the month. And will we all be invited to the wedding?" "Of course. Your family." Betty smiled upon hearing that. Family. It was a word that had gained a much broader meaning in recent months. "Speaking of family," she said, "Sarah wants to know if you're up for a barbecue on Sunday." "Of course," said Ryan. "Can I bring Ashley?" "You can. The more, the merrier." "And can I bring my mom, too? She's visiting the city." "Your mom?" asked Frank. "Nancy?" "Yes. She was very emotional when she heard that you had reconciled. He said it's what he wanted to see most before." Ryan stopped mid-sentence, realizing he'd touched on a sensitive subject. "Before what?" asked Betty. "She's sick. Cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months." The silence that followed was heavy. Frank sat in a nearby chair. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't want you to feel obligated to visit her out of pity." "Obligated? Ryan, she's my sister. You haven't spoken in 20 years. So what? She's still my sister." "Do you want to see her?" "Yes. Very much." "Then Sunday will be perfect. It'll be like a family reunion." "A family reunion," repeated Frank. "It's been so long." "It'll be all right, Dad," said Jason, putting a hand on his father's shoulder. "Now that we've learned to really talk, everything will be fine." On Sunday, Jason's house was full. Ryan had brought Ashley and Nancy. Frank had invited some neighbors. Betty had prepared food for an army. When Frank saw Nancy for the first time in 20 years, he barely recognized her. The illness had changed her appearance, but her eyes remained the same, sweet and intelligent as they'd always been. "Hi, little brother," she said, using the childhood nickname. "Hi, Nan," he replied, using hers. They hugged for a long time, and when they separated, both were crying. "I missed you," she said. "I missed you too. Jack always said that one day the 3 of us would be a family again. He was right, as always." "As always," she agreed, smiling. During lunch, Nancy told childhood stories Frank had forgotten. Ryan and Jason discovered they had much more in common than they'd imagined. Ashley fit into the family as if she'd always been part of it. "May I make a toast?" asked Nancy, raising her glass. "Of course," everyone said. "To my brother Jack, who, even though he's no longer here, managed to bring the whole family together again. And to my brother Frank, who finally learned that pride is foolish when it comes to family." "To Uncle Jack," said Ryan. "To Grandpa Jack, who I never met, but who must have been a very special man," said Emma with her 3 years, making everyone laugh and cry at the same time. "To love, that overcomes any disagreement," said Ashley. "To family," said Betty. "To family," everyone repeated. After lunch, while the others talked in the living room, Frank and Nancy went out to the backyard. "How much time do you have?" he asked. "The doctors said 6 months. But you know how doctors are. They could be wrong for better or worse. Are you afraid?" "A little. But I'm also at peace. I got to see my children grow up, met my daughter-in-law, saw my brother and my son reconcile. I have nothing to complain about." "Nan, No need to apologize, Frank. We all made mistakes. What matters is we're here now." "But I wasted so much time." "You didn't waste it. You lived, worked, took care of your family, grew, learned, all that was necessary for you to become the man you are today. A better man, a wiser man, and wisdom always comes with humility. Jack always said that, and he was right, as always." They laughed together, and for a moment Frank felt as if he were 15 again, talking with his sister in their parents' backyard. "Nan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Would you like to spend some time here in Leadville? Betty and I have a guest room, and it would be good to have you nearby." "Are you sure?" "I am. I want to make up for lost time." "What about the treatments?" "We'll figure it out. What matters is being together." Nancy smiled, and in that smile Frank saw the child she would always be to him. "I accept, but only if Betty agrees. She already does. In fact, it was her idea." "Of course it was. Betty was always smarter than all of us." "It's true." They went back inside the house where they found everyone in the living room talking animatedly. Emma was sitting on Ryan's lap, who was showing her photos on his cell phone. Jason and Sarah were talking with Ashley about wedding plans. Betty was in the kitchen, putting away the dishes. "Everyone," said Frank, "I have an announcement to make." Everyone stopped talking. "Nan is going to come live with us for a while." "That's great," shouted Emma, clapping her hands. "It'll be wonderful to have Grandma Nan around," said Jason. "I can help with anything you need," offered Ashley. "And me too," said Ryan. "Thank you, everyone," said Nan, moved. "You don't know how much this means to me." "It means a lot to all of us," said Betty, coming out of the kitchen and hugging her sister-in-law. That night, after everyone had left, Frank sat on the porch of his house with Betty by his side. "It was a good day," she said. "It was the best day in a long time. Do you think we really managed to form a family again?" "We did. And this time, for real. Without fights, without pride, without misunderstandings, with fights, with pride, and with misunderstandings, but also with a lot of love and a lot of patience to solve everything." "How are you so sure?" "Because I finally learned the lesson that Jack tried to teach me my whole life." "What lesson?" "That family isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about forgiving. It's about starting over as many times as necessary. And are you ready for that?" "I am. For the first time in my life, I'm truly ready." Betty held her husband's hand. "Then let's start over. Together." "Together," he agreed, squeezing her hand. In the starry sky of Leadville, one star shone brighter than the others. Frank liked to think it was Jack, approving the new family they had built on the ruins of the old one. An imperfect family, but a real one. A family with problems, but with enough love to overcome them. A family that had learned that the past doesn't define the future, but that forgiveness can transform both. And that night, as the wind blew softly through the mountains of Colorado, Frank Miller slept in peace for the first time in 20 years, knowing he had found his way back home. 6 months later, Nan passed away peacefully, surrounded by everyone she loved. Her last days were full of laughter, conversations, and shared memories. She died as she had lived, with dignity, courage, and love. At the funeral, Frank felt no anger or bitterness. He felt gratitude for having had the chance to reconcile with his sister, and for having learned that love is stronger than any resentment. Ryan married Ashley 3 months after Nan's passing. It was a simple but beautiful ceremony, held at the mining company itself, with the giant excavator decorated with flowers in the background. During the speech, Ryan thanked Jack Miller for bringing all those people together and for proving that miracles can happen when we least expect them. The Miller & Son workshop continued to grow. They opened a branch in Denver, and started giving mechanics courses for young people in the region. Jason became a technical teacher, teaching other young men the art of fixing machines and, more importantly, the art of fixing relationships. Emma grew up playing among wrenches and screws, learning that there's no problem that can't be solved with patience, knowledge, and a lot of love. By the age of 7, she already knew how to change a truck's oil and mediate arguments between stubborn adults. Frank became a grandfather to 2 more grandchildren, George, son of Ryan and Ashley, and Lily, second daughter of Jason and Sarah. The house that was once too quiet was now always full of children's laughter and lively conversations. "Are you happy?" Betty asked Frank one Sunday afternoon as they watched the grandchildren playing in the backyard. "I am. Very happy. Even with all the problems we still have? Especially because of the problems we still have. They give me the chance to show that I've learned to handle difficulties better. And what have you learned? That life isn't about avoiding problems. It's about facing them together with the people we love. Jack would be proud of you. Jack is proud of me, I'm sure of that." At that moment, Emma ran up to them. Grandpa, George is crying because his doll broke." "Let's see what we can do," said Frank, standing up. "You can fix anything, right, Grandpa?" "Not anything, my princess, but the most important things in life, those we can always fix." "Like what?" "Like families, like friendships, like broken hearts." "And how did you learn to fix those things?" Frank looked at Betty, who smiled back. "Learned with lots of practice, many mistakes, and much love," she replied. "And never stopping trying," Frank added. "Even when it seems impossible?" "Especially when it seems impossible." Emma nodded solemnly, as if receiving a very important lesson. "So shall we fix George's doll?" "Let's. And then we'll teach him how to fix the next ones that break. So he won't be sad. So he learns that everything in life can be fixed, as long as we don't give up." Hand in hand, grandfather and granddaughter walked to where George was crying while hugging the pieces of his doll. Within minutes, with some glue, lots of patience, and several funny stories to distract the boy, the doll was as good as new. "Thank you, Grandpa Frank," said George, hugging him. "You're welcome, my champion. Remember, whenever something breaks, you can come find me. Anything. Anything that's important to you. And if you don't know how to fix it, then we learn together. The important thing is to never give up." When the sun set that afternoon, Frank sat on the same porch where he had spent so many lonely nights. But now it was full of life. Jason and Ryan were discussing business, Sarah and Ashley were planning the next family barbecue, the children were playing in the yard, and Betty was serving coffee and cookies to everyone. Frank looked at that scene and remembered the giant machine that had changed everything. It was still working perfectly at the mining company, fueling dreams and supporting the families of hundreds of people. But its true purpose had been fulfilled the moment it brought them all back together. Jack was right, he thought. Sometimes to fix a machine, you first need to fix the people who will operate it. And sometimes, to fix people, you first need to mend the bonds that unite them. That night, before going to sleep, Frank opened the drawer of the nightstand and took out Jack's letter, now yellowed and worn from being read so many times. He already knew all the words by heart, but he liked to reread it occasionally to remember how it all began. "Frank, if you're reading this, it means you need my help even though I'm no longer here." He smiled reading those words. Jack had been right about everything. He had foreseen that he would need help, that he would resist at first, that he would eventually accept the challenge, and that in the end he would find much more than a solution for a broken machine. He had found his family again. He had found his son again. He had found himself again. "What are you thinking about?" asked Betty, lying down beside him. "About Jack. About how he knew more about me than I did myself." "He knew you well." "He did. And loved me anyway. Like all real families do." "Like all real families do," Frank repeated, putting the letter back in the drawer. "Tomorrow is Monday, back to work." "Yes. Jason wants me to teach those new young men how to work with diesel engines. Do you like teaching? I love it. It's a way to pass on everything I've learned, and to learn new things too. Jack would be happy to know you've become a teacher. Jack is happy. Wherever he is, he's happy knowing we managed to form the family he always dreamed of. Betty snuggled into her husband's arm. Good night, love. Good night, Betty. Thank you. Thank you for what? For staying with me all these years, for putting up with me when I was unbearable, for helping me become a better man. We helped each other. That's what people who love each other do. That's true. Frank turned off the light and closed his eyes. Outside, life continued its natural course, the wind swaying the trees, the crickets singing, the world spinning in its eternal orbit. But inside that house, a small universe had found its perfect balance. The next day, like every morning, Frank woke up early and went to the workshop. But now he didn't go alone. Jason went with him, and often Emma went along too, sitting between them on the front seat of the pickup truck. Grandpa, tell the story of the giant machine, she asked during the ride. Again, you already know that story by heart. But I like it. It's a beautiful story. All right. Once upon a time there was a stubborn man who thought he knew everything. You. Me indeed. And this stubborn man received an offer to fix a machine that nobody could get working. Jason smiled while listening to his father tell the story to his daughter. It was a story he never tired of hearing, because each time it was told it gained new details and became richer. And in the end, was everyone happy? Asked Emma, even though she knew the answer. In the end, everyone was happy, and they learned that the most important things in life can't be bought, only earned. What things? Love, family, friendship, forgiveness. And machines. Machines too, because machines that run with love always work better. When they arrived at the workshop, Ryan was already there talking with some employees. There were 3 machines waiting to be repaired, and 2 new apprentices waiting to start training. Good morning, Miller and Son family, said Ryan, who had adopted this morning greeting. Good morning, Ryan, replied Frank. How are things at the mining company? Very well, production is at the best level in the company's history. And how is Ashley? Feeling nauseous. Ryan smiled. We're expecting our first child. Congratulations, shouted Jason, hugging his cousin. Another grandchild, said Frank, emotional. It's going to be a girl, announced Ryan. We're going to name her Jackie, in honor of Uncle Jack. Frank felt his eyes fill with tears. He would be honored. I'm sure he would be. Emma tugged on her father's pants. Dad, does that mean I'm going to have a little cousin? It means you are my princess. That's great. I'm going to teach her everything Grandpa taught me. What did Grandpa teach you? That everything can be fixed if we don't give up. And anything else. And that family is the most important thing in the world. Frank bent down and hugged his granddaughter. You learned it well, my princess. It was easy. You're a good teacher, Grandpa. I learned from the best, he said, looking at the sky. That morning, while working on a truck engine, Frank thought about everything that had happened since that day Ryan showed up at his workshop. It had been a long and difficult journey, full of painful revelations and emotional reconciliations. But every moment had been worth it. Every tear, every difficult conversation, every moment of swallowed pride, every apology. Everything had contributed to building something bigger and more beautiful than any of them could have imagined alone. At 5 in the afternoon, when the workday ended, the whole family gathered in the workshop for the daily ritual, cleaning the tools, tidying up the place, and planning the next day's work. Tomorrow we'll start the overhaul of the excavator from Holy Cross Quarry, announced Jason. It's a big job, commented Frank. But no job is too big for the Miller and Son team. Or too small, added Ryan. Because the size of the job doesn't matter, said Emma, repeating a phrase she'd heard many times. What matters is the care we put into it. Exactly, confirmed Frank. The care we put into it. When they left the workshop, the sun was setting behind the mountains of Leadville, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It was a sight Frank had seen thousands of times, but one he never tired of admiring. Dad, said Jason, putting his hand on his father's shoulder. Thank you. What for? For teaching me that it's never too late to start over. It was Uncle Jack who taught me that. I just passed the lesson on. Then thank you both. You're welcome, son. That's what family does. Teaches, learns, and grows together. That night, once again, Frank and Betty's house was full of life. It was Sarah's birthday, and everyone had gathered to celebrate. There was cake, laughter, gifts, and many stories. During dinner, Ryan stood up to make a toast. I'd like to thank all of you for giving me a real family. 2 years ago, I was a lost young man trying to save a company I'd inherited, not really knowing what I was doing. Today, I'm a fulfilled man, with a wonderful wife, a baby on the way, and a family that supports me in everything. All because you had the courage to seek help, said Frank, and because you had the courage to accept help. Actually, said Betty, it was all because Jack planted the right seeds in the right hearts. To Uncle Jack, said Ryan, raising his glass. To Uncle Jack, everyone repeated. And to second chances, added Jason. And to families that find each other again, said Sarah. And to grandfathers who can fix anything, said Emma. And to machines that teach us about what really matters, Frank concluded. Everyone drank in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them there. After the party, when everyone had left, Frank and Betty sat on the porch as they did every night. It was a good party, she said. It was. Sarah seemed happy. Everyone seemed happy. Because everyone is happy. Genuinely happy. You included. Me especially. Betty snuggled into her husband's arm. You know what moves me most about this whole story? What? Seeing how you've changed. Seeing how you've become a kinder, more patient, more loving man. Jack always said that we only truly grow old when we stop learning and growing. And you haven't stopped. No, and I don't plan to. I still have a lot to learn, a lot to grow. We both do. That's true. But now we have the whole family to help us on that journey, and grandchildren to pass our wisdom on to. And machines to fix, Frank laughed. And machines to fix, Betty agreed, laughing too. They sat there until late at night, watching the stars and talking about plans for the future. There was still so much to live, so much to share, so much to celebrate. When they finally went to sleep, Frank stopped once again in front of the drawer where he kept Jack's letter. He didn't take it out this time, just touched the drawer affectionately. Thank you, brother, he whispered, for everything. And that night, as Leadville slept peacefully under the blanket of stars, Frank Miller dreamed of machines that worked perfectly, families reunited, and brothers embracing never to part again. The next day, life went on as usual, machines to fix, employees to train, grandchildren to spoil, family to love. But now everything had a different flavor, sweeter, more meaningful. The Miller & Son workshop became more than a business. It turned into a community gathering spot. People came not only to get their machines repaired, but to chat, seek advice, and feel part of something bigger. Frank discovered he had a knack for teaching and began giving talks at technical schools about mechanics and life. He always ended his talks with the same phrase, "Remember, young folks, anything can be fixed, as long as you don't give up and have the right people by your side." Jason became a reference for heavy machinery maintenance throughout the region. Customers came from various neighboring towns just for him to take care of their equipment. But he never forgot to credit his success to his father and the uncle he never met in person, but who was present in every lesson he received. Ryan expanded the mining company and became one of the most respected businessmen in the area. But he never lost his humility and always made a point of saying that his success started the day he had the courage to ask for help from a retired mechanic. The children grew up hearing stories about family, forgiveness, and second chances. Emma became a wise and caring girl, always with a comforting word for those who were sad and a creative idea to solve any problem. Betty found fulfillment like never before, watching her family grow and strengthen. She became the official matriarch of the clan, the one who organized gatherings, remembered birthdays, and made sure no one got lost along the way. And Jack, even though he was no longer physically present, remained a strong presence in everyone's lives. His lessons, his wisdom, and his love showed in every gesture of affection, every moment of forgiveness, every decision to put family first. The giant excavator kept running perfectly, But now everyone knew its true value wasn't in the millions it cost or the contracts it secured. Its value was in the lives it had changed, the family it had reunited, the love it had restored. Years later, when Frank was 80 years old and had a workshop full of employees, apprentices and interns, someone asked what had been the most difficult repair of his career. He smiled and replied, "The hardest was fixing my own family. It took 20 years, a lot of patience, and a little help from my brother who was no longer here. But it was also the most important repair, because when you fix a family, you fix multiple generations." "And how do you fix a family?" asked the young apprentice. "With a lot of love, a lot of forgiveness, and the understanding that no one is perfect. But everyone deserves a second chance, and sometimes a third, a fourth, as many as it takes. Just like a machine. Exactly like a machine. You identify the problem, look for the solution, apply the fix, and test if it's working. If not, you try again in a different way until you succeed. And if it still doesn't work, then you call someone more experienced to help, because there's always someone who knows something you don't, and there's always a solution, as long as you don't give up." The young man nodded, storing those words in his heart. Years later, when he faced his own family challenges, he would remember that advice and find the strength not to give up. And so, Jack Miller's wisdom continued to spread, from father to son, from grandfather to grandson, from mentor to apprentice. A lesson that transcended generations and became an eternal legacy of love, forgiveness, and hope. The giant machine still worked perfectly, but its most important mission had already been accomplished. It had taught everyone that sometimes, to fix a machine, you first need to fix your own heart, and that there is no engine more powerful than the love of a united family. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming and family reconciliation. Do you believe Frank made the right decisions by forgiving and reconciling with his family? How would you react if you were in his place? Share your opinion in the comments. We love hearing your reflections on these heartwarming stories. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories we've prepared especially for you.